The Crusades began in the High Middle Ages. During this time, the West was more unified than at any other time since the reign of Constantine. Although the West and East had grave differences, this did not prevent them from cooperating in one of the most astonishing military ventures, which was the Crusades. The West and East felt something had to be done about the inroads made by Islam. Constantinople was hard pressed and was captured by militant Turks. In 1804, Nicaea, the closest fortified city to Constantinople, fell to the Turks. The West was more than happy to assist the East, but for their own personal reasons, not because they felt any affection for Constantinople. The First Crusade was called by Pope Urban II and is considered the People's Crusade. The First Crusade was not only appealing to religious people, but also professional soldiers. They set out to take back Jerusalem in a methodical way. There were four main armies containing about 70,000 soldiers that were led by leaders who proceeded by different routes to their rendezvous points in Constantinople. First, troops arrived in late December of 1096, followed by the rest in April and May of 1097. The forces had not come to save Constantinople, but instead to conquer Jerusalem. First engagements were successful, but boded ill for the future. The first Turkish fortification to be attacked was Nicaea, and was basically empty of fighting men since they were all fighting other Turks. The town was reduced due to a short siege that lasted 6 weeks. Just before the Crusaders stormed the walls and claimed their spoils, the Byzantine flag was seen flying from the turrets. This was due to the fact that the Turks had secretly surrendered to the Greeks. This resulted in the Western generals and armies being infuriated. This came to be known as the talk of Greek treachery. The Greek army did little to allay these hostile feelings, headed east to retake its former possessions, while the West headed inland and directly into the Turkish Sultan of Nicaea. The two armies went ahead, and when Bohemond received reinforcements, they surrounded the Turks and earned a complete victory. The next battle was in Antioch and can be considered a tragic comedy. The Crusaders had sieged the Turks and won the battle, but only 2 days later would be besieged by a large Turkish army.
The Third Crusade was one with great names. On the Turkish side they had General Saladin, who united the Turks and took back Jerusalem. This initiated the call for the Third Crusade that was led by Frederick Barbarossa of Germany, Richard the Lion-Hearted, and Philip II of France. This crusade had great names, but they were not the main thing to focus on. The first tragedy that happened was Frederick Barbarossa dying en route due to a heart attack. The Allied forces then captured the port town of Acre, but at the cost of half of their men, most of them dying due to a disease, and those that survived were too weak to fight. The King of France went home after the sieging, and Richard was made the leader. Richard then slaughtered 3,000 prisoners who were captured when Acre fell. A considerable amount of land was recaptured along the Mediterranean coast, but Jerusalem remained in the control of Saladin.
After the events of the first three crusades, the crusading spirit began to die out, causing the next 5 crusades to be ineffective and pretty much a failure. As resentment towards the Greeks grew and attempts were made to capture Constantinople, the East and the West grew more bitter and hostile towards each other, making it harder to unify them. The 7th and 8th Crusades were also a complete failure due to the bad leadership decisions and choices made by Louis IX. Louis IX chose to fight from the banks of Africa, but since his armies were unorganized, they were slaughtered and captured on the banks of the Nile. Shortly after being captured, Louis died of disease and died. The final crusades compared to the first one, and somewhat to the second and third ones, is different because the first crusade maintained its religious goal to take back the Holy Land. As more crusades were initiated, that religious drive failed and began to dwindle as the crusades were being initiated for other personal or political matters. On top of bad leadership, the armies were unorganized and internal conflicts were persisting, like mutiny. The official end to the original 8 crusades was marked at the Battle of Acre, when the town of Acre fell. After this defeat, Jerusalem would no longer be targeted by the Crusaders, and was pretty much well defended. This doesn't mean that all crusades ended, however. Multiple smaller-sized crusades were still going on. The Turkish threat still persisted in Europe, and their armies invaded Europe at different points, specifically in Greece and Italy. The Turkish threat was put to an end at a massive battle in Vienna. After this battle, the Turkish threat was put to an end for good, and it hasn't attacked Europe since. So, what did the Crusades actually accomplish? Because it doesn't seem like they did much. Militarily, they accomplished very little. Many men died, and the quality of their military worsened from every battle. Jerusalem was still in Muslim hands, along with Asia Minor and North Africa, as the armies failed to achieve their original goals. Along with this, the Eastern and Western Christianity was still divided. On the plus side, the Crusades kept the Muslims on the defensive and helped Europe and Byzantium survive. The Crusades also created a common enemy for Europe to come together and fight. It also signified that the Pope was an international leader and had supremacy over some government officials. So why did the Crusades fail then? The leadership sold most of the land to help finance their army in anticipation of finding more riches while crusading. The common soldiers also mutinied after they captured Antioch, saying they wanted to do more than that. They wanted to capture Jerusalem and take back the Holy Land. Due to the distance of Jerusalem, reinforcements and supplies caused multiple downfalls of Jerusalem. Supplies took many days to get to Jerusalem and often arrived too late. The reinforcements arrived too late too and could not take up arms in time to defend Jerusalem. The news of Jerusalem's fall again and again deadened the sensibilities of Europeans who had never seen it and made them lose hope for saving it. So how did this affect the West then? After the final crusade, the West became more divided than ever. The Norman and Frankish kingdoms despised Byzantium, and they chose to carve out their own nations instead of restoring Byzantium. You can compare this to the fall of Rome in 410. On a better note, the Crusades brought home respect for women. Attitude toward women in the East was more respectable, although women were still not on equal boundaries with men. This attitude stuck with the Crusaders and carried over to the West. One way you can see this actually taking effect is when they started naming churches after the Virgin Mary.